Martinez. I will be the moderator for today's panel. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a social work major here at the university. And then I'm also an intern at the Women's Center. And I have been planning COVID-19 discussions to look how the pandemic has impacted various marginalized communities. And today we will be specifically focusing on looking how COVID has impacted the African refugees. So we have two panelists with here us today. So we can begin by having each of you introduce yourselves.
Okay, I'll go. My name is Ayak, and I am an anthropology major here at UWO. I'm a senior, and I'm also an intern at the Women's Center. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And yeah.
All right. First of all, thanks for inviting me to come and join you in this discussion this morning. My name is Mushe Subulwa. This morning I come to you as a father, a husband, a son, and above all, a SEPO founder and director. So thanks for inviting me to the forum.
And then a specific question for Mushe. I was wondering how you got interested in this type of work.
Okay. I guess I have to take us back to the beginning. I think everybody has done some advocacy in smaller ways or to bigger ways. I think advocacy work starts in our own homes with our families and how we are raised by our parents to either stand up for those that do not have a voice. You know, it starts from our homes and then it goes out to a larger world out there. Now, specifically myself, how I started this advocating for people, I would say it starts first with advocating for myself and also listening to those around me, also by allowing them give me a chance to question things. So I would say I started listening to my uncles while I was living in a village back then. And most of the conversations I was listening to that time was more on the British colonial kind of governments that they had, the troubles that they faced every day, and how they were either running away. And that encouraged me to question a lot of things. And then later on, I started realizing our government back home, that's something that they were doing that made me realize, wait a minute, this is wrong. This cannot happen. So I started questioning a lot. Basically, I was questioning authority, questioning government, and that got me in trouble in certain ways. So from then on, I moved on and not realizing that what I do is advocacy work, because at that time, I was just doing it for myself and for the community that I lived in there. And when I moved to the United States, actually, it got more amplified to a position where we are at today as SEPO Zambia. I don't know if you can see my card over there. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And then I know you kind of started to touch on this, but can both of you kind of describe your background as a refugee? I don't know if you want to start.
Okay. I moved here with my mom and my sister in 2004. And we moved here from Egypt, which is kind of where we're like displaced to. So in 1994, the U.S. started granting resettlement and permanent residency for Sudanese refugees, and that was due to a civil war that started in 1956. And most of the refugees that were displaced were South Sudanese people, and they were displaced into Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda. So almost all Sudanese refugees that are resettled in the U.S. right now are from the South. So, yeah.
Well, for me, I really not describe myself as a refugee, but I have a lot of background being among refugee population. The part of the country that I come from, the western part of Zambia, has had several refugee camps that are like well established by the United Nations and other organizations. But also we have neighboring countries, because the neighboring countries had conflict. We're talking about Mozambique and Angola. So some of those refugees running away from violence ended up just spilling into the neighboring country villages around. So I basically grew up among the refugee population. Throughout my life, I've always been among refugees. And basically, my way of life, there's no difference between me and the refugee because I understand it by being among them. Yeah.
And then moving on to more local, can you describe a little bit about how the African refugee population looks within the Oshkosh area?
Okay. Just to top up on what Ayak just briefly said, in the state of Wisconsin, I know I have not looked at the numbers recently, but the numbers I still remember very much on top of my head is around 2016, between 2002 and 2016, we had Oshkosh resettle about 800 refugees, being the second largest city in Wisconsin to have this big number of refugees. Now, we have to understand that we had earlier refugees before the Sudanese arrived in Oshkosh. We had those from Laos or Burma in here. So later on, the Sudanese came, the Congolese, and everybody else. But we have to understand that this line, people do not understand that in order for somebody to come into our city or in our towns and resettled here, some of these refugees have spent maybe 10, 15 years in refugee camps in those countries where they come from. For example, like Ayak has spoken, before she arrived here, they spent amount of considerable time in Egypt or Kenya, So that transition, sometime you could easily find someone who is being resettled right now in Oshkosh. They've been away from their own home for the last 25 years. So, like I said, the population has grown. Those numbers that I gave you from 2002 to 2016, I'm only talking about those that are registered by the World Relief or what the government knows here at the office downtown. But the number has increased, and that number increment is not normally looked at, because what normally happens is when, for example, I'll give you an example of the Sudanese refugees. So we have a population that was settled here in Oshkosh that includes Ayak's mom, cousins, and uncles settled here in Oshkosh. And Oshkosh, being a city that provides good employment, the environment is conducive. Naturally, they start talking to their own relatives that are settled somewhere else. For example, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and other places, maybe Texas. So the moment they start telling their relatives that, hey, life is good in Oshkosh, they start migrating, they start coming in. So I can tell you the first time I think I knew Ayak when she was a young girl, there were a few Sudanese maybe that time. But over time, the population increased because others came from other states. So I've seen the number rise as years go. That is not only about the Sudanese. I'm also adding up with the Congolese and others.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Do you have anything else?
I can definitely, I agree with that concept that word of mouth and just bringing in people from around, because we are very community oriented, and that's a very big part of our culture. So yeah, I think my uncle is here right now. He's staying with my mom, and he's like looking for places, looking for work, and he's just trying to find a job and secure a home and bring his family from New York. So it's just kind of like that constant cycle.
Connection.
Yeah.
So Beginning to look more into the pandemic, can you discuss why the refugee population is one of the most vulnerable populations during this time?
Okay. Yes. The refugee population is more vulnerable than any other for two things. We have structural barriers. When I mean structural barriers, I'm talking about employment, places of work. And then we have our own language barrier on how communication is done. Now, maybe I'll start with the language barrier. The system or the government might not have maybe prepared for this, that this was going to happen. I'm talking about the local government here in terms of finding good interpreters who could communicate effectively to the population what is needed to be done. So we have the language barrier. Now, when I talk about those structural barriers, I'm talking about places of work. So here you are a refugee, you're not feeling good, you're at work, and you want to go get yourself tested. Mostly what I've discovered is there's no companies allowing some of these people access to go get tested or go get your COVID vaccines. So we have two issues that has been affecting this population.
Thank you. Do you have anything?
I think just considering that refugees are already a vulnerable population of people already due to a lot of different intersections of their identities. But I think just like what he said, considering the language barriers, considering the cultural barriers that separate the way we function here and how we function back home. So I think that's definitely the biggest barriers are language and culture. But I think we also have to sometimes put in like race and ethnicity because, you know, as African refugees, we're Black, you know, so we're Black here in the West, and like just the concept of Blackness and like what that means overall for our identity, you know. So I think that's something we don't always consider because we're African, and I think I see that too, like within my community, that there isn't that social awareness of that concept as well.
Yeah, I want to top up a little bit also on, just to add up a little bit. So we have the language barrier that I spoke about a little bit earlier on, but we also have our own issues among ourselves because you have to understand that the larger population of the refugee community might not have education like Ayak. We are talking about parents here who have a level of education maybe 7th grade or even below. So that population cannot like really read and understand. So what has happened is it becomes even more vulnerable to whisper campaign from among the community. For example, if one refugee decide to say, hey, I think let's not go for vaccine or let's not go for test, that becomes like a wildfire. So information is twisted like that among our community from our own because we don't have that way of communication that is clear. And then the younger ones, the young one that are educated, some of them are still young. We have a little, some of them like Ayak who are graduating, who can do at least a good job of explaining to parents. But most majority of this population that I see in our community, they have children who are like maybe in 5th grade, 7th grade. So those children cannot really explain to their parents what's going on. And that brings me to another point. So that it affects their education as well, because my son, for example, has a privilege of coming home from school and I can help in terms of homework. Okay, so if you have a mom from the refugee background who does not know how to read, then it's chaos. There's no help, you know. So it's just so complicated. Yeah.
Has there been like any way to like overcome that barrier to like better provide adequate information about COVID-19 to this population?
Honestly, I can't say that I know of any, because as I interact with like my family members, my community members, I just want to make a quick note that like when I do reference people from my community, I might say my aunt or my uncle or my cousin. I'm not related to everybody like how we do relation here, so just a heads up. But like when I do talk to like my aunts and my uncles and stuff, like I still see that there is that miscommunication. There is still that lack of understanding. And although like a lot of us have been here for a long duration of time, there is still that language barrier, and there isn't really like, we don't like, even like the interpreters, they speak Arabic. We don't really have Deng, like people who speak Danka, which is like the language I speak, you know. So it's like even that, it's like another language you have to know, you know. So
Yeah. From the other side, we have the World Relief Organization and the churches, plus a little from the county and the government trying to come in and help. Now, you also have to understand that refugees by nature are people who do not trust government, because the reason why they became refugees, some of them is running away from certain governments. Okay, so when they are here, sometimes government has to be very careful on how they communicate to this population that they've decided they're going to settle down in our cities. I'm talking about the county and the city. That leaves the church to come in, the church and the other organization. Now, from what I have seen in this town, the church have done a good job in certain ways, but I've also seen the church have done very, very, very bad. During this pandemic, you'd think some of the church leaders in this town would be in the forefront in communicating effectively, because these leaders they have the trust among the people, among the refugees. So you'd expect these leaders to be in the forefront in advising or advocating for masks or social distancing. But what I saw personally, I got disappointed over this whole entire period, where certain churches in our town, this population of refugees are packed in without masks. Why? Because the church leaders are encouraging that. Now, what ends up happening is we've had so many cases of this COVID transmitting from one family to another family. And when they get to be sick, everybody just stays home. So as leaders, what do we do? Like myself, spending some time on the phone, talking to some of these refugees that are sick, and going around getting groceries and providing for them. You know, so it's been just like a confusion. I do understand that the government is doing their part, but I think the church leaders or myself, we have more because these people are closer to us, they listen to us. If we do our job right, I think things will be smooth.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to kind of bring awareness to the issue within your own community. And are there any other resources within the area that do support, like, are of greatest support for the refugee population?
Yeah, we do have, like I said, so we communicate a lot on WhatsApp group. So we have, I don't know if Ayak, you're part of the group. So we have this massive WhatsApp group that we have, which we use to communicate. So for example, when I got my first vaccine shot, I had to send it on that group so that everybody else can see that I've taken my vaccine. And that brought in a lot of discussion in the community, because already there are people on the fence. And when I mean people on the fence, I'm talking about, even when I put myself there, is to assure them, like, it's okay, it's safe, let's go get it done on that platform. But we have to understand that these people, they have other platforms. They still communicate with other family members back home in the home countries they come from, whether it's in the Congo or in Sudan. So there's that traffic of communication. So somebody in Sudan or in South Sudan may say, hey, that actual vaccine is problematic. That spills into the community. And then basically maybe 2 weeks ago, I was so surprised, like one of the refugees that I know was scared to come close to me because I'm vaccinated. Instead of being comfortable coming close to me, you can see like, oh man, they're like, oh, you are vaccinated, so you're gonna bring COVID to me. So yes, we have platforms that we try to use every day to communicate. Yeah.
Do you have anything?
Yeah, I guess just to add to that, with the concept of multiple platforms, I know that like, especially like my mom, I see that she's constantly communicating with people like everywhere, you know, all over the United States, all over like back home too. So there is that constant like I can't tell you the amount of time she came to me with new information that she got from home of like this new remedy that works for COVID, you know, and so many times I had to tell her like, okay, like, yes, mom, drinking hot liquids is good for you.
Right.
Like, naturally anyways. So like, don't, you know, so it's just like these little things where I'm just like, I totally get like using this plant or doing this, but I have to sometimes redirect, and I have to be careful because even though like I am her child and I'm a part of this community, I'm also aware that like these are cultural beliefs, these are like ways of life, this is how you were raised, like you use this stuff when you're sick, you know. So I don't want to like say, well, your method is not as good as their method, but I just want to make sure that they understand that you can do yours, but try to do this one too, you know.
Yeah, so I know there's concerns about the vaccines. Is there like a further mistrust with the healthcare system?
Well, like I said, the mistrust really among the community, it's not only on the refugee population or the African immigrant, it's all over the place. It's from here at the university here, you have members of staff in the hospitals, you might have nurses who are skeptical about taking vaccines. And we have seen on television, on certain forums where you have actual doctors, you know, concerned about that. And then when that spills into the larger community of, I'm sorry to use this word, uneducated population. When I mean uneducated, I'm talking about our people who have not very much level of education, like what Ayak is talking about. It just explodes. I mean, it's serious problem. You know, that's the reason why Ayak's mom would more comfortable to drink that hot liquid that she's been told by somebody home in South Juba than go to get a vaccine. You know, so the concern is general. It's all over the place. Yeah.
Okay, and then are there any further barriers that impact this population from obtaining healthcare or testing?
The barriers. Okay, I spoke about employment. Yes, place of employment as a big barrier too. But even though I have seen certain companies right now trying to basically like mandate, like if you want to work here, then you're going to have you have to get your vaccine done. So that is on being taken care of. But mostly, really, I think it's that and the language barrier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, just concept of language and culture, those barriers make more barriers. So you can just keep going into it. So, yeah.
And then I know there was some discussion about jobs. How has COVID-19 like affected job security?
Oh yes, in the beginning, it was a problem because especially the newer refugees, those that came in a long time, like Ayak's mom, could have stable jobs, like maybe you've been working in a factory for 5 years, so you have a stable job. But the newer arrivals, what normally happens is after they learn a little bit of English, the, the quickest jobs that are available for such people normally is working in the hotels, cleaning at the hotels or in the hospitals. So what happened earlier on in the pandemic, hotels, no one was going to the hotels. So a lot of those people basically lost their jobs. So that was money problem, yeah. But again, I know there's a way we cushion ourselves in the community here, because if one has lost a job, that doesn't mean that they will starve. They will still go to the neighbor. We come in and help each other. So that part was taken care of. Yeah. So anyway, the pandemic itself, yes, affected so many, not only the people working in hotels, but even some who work in the factories, because some factories had to close as well, you know.
Mhm.
And then that brings another problem, because they have to, there are these systems in the government where you have to apply for like unemployment. Okay. So first you close the companies because of COVID, and then these people have to go into these government platforms and apply for funding, you know. And that's where another problem that I saw happening, because some of them are not able to go in and actually do it themselves. So they would rely on these agencies like the World Relief and other agencies to help them navigate that. And also those offices as well were closed as well, because nobody was open, allowing physical contact. So that population was left vulnerable to be on a computer, try to navigate the system. It was so difficult to help somebody on the cell phone, even myself, like, okay, here's how you can apply for money, you know. It was really difficult. Some were able to get the money, but others were not. And that's how the church came in and to do these food dropouts sometimes. Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add?
I think another factor to job security, especially in my community, I think we should note that a lot of families are single like parent households. Even if you start with like a 2-parent household, it's in our culture, men typically aren't there to take care of kids to do that kind of thing anyway. So you start to kind of like separate, and you see that pattern in our communities, because there is a lot of like single parents. So then it's like these women doing these jobs, they also have kids, you know, so then these kids have to stay home. Like in the beginning, you know, kids are staying home, they're doing online school, and on top of not being able to help your kids, you have to try to keep up with these schedules of like, okay, now you're online, now you're back in school, and how those schedules impact their work schedules, because it's not like they have jobs that they can do from home, you know. So there's a lot of relying on your older children to take care of your younger children, and then in that process maybe you're not aware, but you're not really valuing the education of your children, you know, and that's not purposeful, that's just trying to survive. So there is just this constant, like, it's impacting everyone in the family, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And have you seen like any support for education within this community, like through the school district or any other services?
I know that the church that a lot of my community members go to, they had like a peer mentorship kind of program where the kids could go there like on Wednesdays and they could get help homework and stuff. And I know like a lot of my aunts, my mom, they found that helpful because, you know, they needed that extra help. So that was nice. But other than that, it's really kind of on the older, I guess you could say kids, to help their parents and help their siblings transition.
Well, at the district level, school district, I'm not sure what they have prepared for this pandemic in case a child is sick, but I can specifically say something that I observed myself, because I had a couple that got COVID, and their kids go to the same school with my smallest child. So you have a mom and a dad in bed, they're sick for the next 2 weeks. So it means that that kid or the kids are not also going to school. So the kids were just staying at home. So there was nothing from the district, in short, that was prepared for those kids. So what we had to do, myself, was to go to the school and basically get a Chromebook and some homework again to bring to the house of that family. I know, like, in such a situation, those kids lost a lot. That entire 14 days that they were home, there was no learning because, like I said, even if the mom and dad were not sick, mom and dad are not capable of helping already, even when they're not sick. But now when you add up the level of, like, there was COVID, the kids had no help. They only had the community coming in, dropping the groceries at the doorstep just to eat. So even when the school provided the homework and the Chromebook, I still felt like it's not working.
And like with some of the impact that COVID has had, like on employment, education, and even like healthcare, how have you seen like all this impact mental health?
Well, well, can I jump on that? Can I go with that one? Um, I'm not trying to make this like people. You have to understand here, like, there are two things here. Uh, we are all affected mentally with the pandemic. First of all, to start with, I saw a lot of struggle among families. I mean, American families, including my own here, in the initial days where you knew, like, you cannot see your grandma, you cannot see your mom, you cannot see your friends. And I saw that affect so many people across the country. And as I was watching that happening, I took a step back and reflected on us, the immigrants, the African immigrants, the refugees. And clearly it came to my mind that what Americans were going through starting last year, early last year, we have been going through this for years. The mental illness on us is an ongoing thing. Why? It takes 5 years for an immigrant to settle down in this country. That would be when you'll be able to see your family back home, like in my case. It takes a refugee 5 years to settle down here to get the paperwork done, but it has taken maybe another 10 years to be in the refugee camps. So you're talking about people who don't see their family on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. So that mental challenge on the refugee population and the immigrant population is an ongoing thing. And when we were looking at how Americans were handling it for the first time, it was devastating to watch, but also, like I said, reflecting on my own was like, wow, it made me realize, like, oh my God, I don't see my sister in 3 years. I don't see my brother in 5 years. And I see my neighbor now is not seeing his mom for 2, 3 weeks. I could see how the pain, and I was trying to do a comparison. Like, look what 3 months can do to somebody, and look what 10 years can do to other people, So there's the line. Yeah, we felt it as well, but we kind of like, we live with it every day for years.
Yeah, I see how that impact kind of starts way earlier on. Do you have anything else,
I guess in terms of mental health, growing up, that mental health is not really a topic that like no one really specifically talks about your mental health. Like, of course, people care about the way you feel, but like, we know it goes deeper than that. So I like I guess like now going through school and like being more aware of myself and watching like my community, I'm seeing how ignoring that, how that's impacting them in a way that they don't really realize, because they don't talk about it. So I don't know. I just know that there's a lot of like silent struggle that doesn't necessarily even have to do with like COVID, but just like you said, just years and years of just trauma that isn't really recognized right away. So definitely.
Yeah, but also, I mean, just to add up on that a little bit, we're gonna have to understand like why did people leave their own home, their initial or original home, to become a refugee? No one wants to become a refugee. Everyone wants to be in their own ancestral lands where their fathers and their forefathers were born and lived. So conflict caused that to happen. Some of these people saw their own families being slaughtered and murdered. That forced them to leave and spend years in other countries until finally they got to the United States. So that trauma that Ayak is talking about is something that will not easily be forgotten. I spend a lot of time talking to some of the refugees here in the US and also in refugee camps, talking to moms that saw their own children being killed, or talking to a lady that saw her entire family killed in front of her. But now as old as she is here in Sheboygan, you know, that trauma, even if she's 40 years old, she still feels it. And there's never been like counseling, you know. So there's that silent trauma that is among our community every day. And maybe the only consolation to that is the community being among each other. I see how these ladies come up together, they cook, they sit, they talk among themselves. Sometimes that's the only, what can I say, kind of like the only thing to at least ease it up. But yes, there's a lot of issues, mental issues, yes.
So like among the younger generation, have you seen like attempts to try to like start more of a conversation around mental health?
I guess I'm kind of lucky because I'm old enough to like talk to the adults in my community, but I'm still like considered a child in a weird way. So I definitely can say that I see that difference between our older generation of people and our younger people, because we do try to talk to each other. We do, like, I have a lot of my little cousins, they come to me, they talk to me about their problems. And, you know, even myself, like, I'm more aware of my traumas and like how growing up as a refugee like impacted me. So I do use those, like, that awareness to try to start conversations with them, because I know that those are probably conversations I needed to as a kid, you know? So definitely.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And then if anyone in the audience has any questions, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat. So the next question I have is, how can community members advocate and support refugees during this time?
Well, community members, I think the community is doing, individual members in the community are doing their part. Not only myself, there are others out there that are every day doing the right thing. Supporting the refugee population or supporting each other, we are doing what we can. But we also want always to work with the government, find the ways that our city, our county, and the school district can join hands with us and do the right thing. Like I said, the church is the most important part here, important piece, because it's only at the church where you can have 100 refugees on Sunday together in one space. And it's that particular space that I think is very, very important to channel the right communication. Like I said, if we can use the church leaders to encourage either vaccines or masks, then we can get where we need to go.
Mhm. Do you have anything else?
Not really. I guess I definitely agree with the concept of the church is probably where we would have to really target most of our education, because he's right. That is where we meet as a community. That is probably the only space where you will see so many refugees in one spot. And it's a very big part of the community life. You know, religion is huge, and it would be very beneficial to have that space be an educational space as well.
And then Alicia asked the question, could you share more about the support that refugees may or may not receive upon their arrival to a particular city? Some people might not be aware that there are not sufficient resources for long-term support, and what that impact might have on the refugee communities even before the pandemic. It's a long question.
Okay, that one for me?
Yeah, you go for it.
All right, so I think the initial place where the refugees get to come to when they get settled here is the World Relief Organization. So when they first arrive here, the World Relief Organization will provide all the necessary places that will give help. We're talking about healthcare or education, and also even employment. So there are those areas where the offices does its work. Other than that, we have now ourselves now as members. We have that network of welcoming the newcomers, and then we spend a lot. The biggest amount of work that we do, I think, is in the community itself, because World Relief or any other agency can do their part, but at the end of the day, it is us who know the culture of American culture here to actually give support and explain the rules and the laws to these newcomers that, hey, you are here in Oshkosh, here's how you behave, you don't drink and drive, you know. So most of the support really they get really from us. The healthcare and education can be provided by those government entities. So yes, we do a lot among ourselves in the community.
So is there a World Relief located in Oshkosh?
Yes, we do have an office here in Oshkosh, and also we have an office in Appleton. So initially, the office here in Oshkosh, I think, operated for a number of years, and then more refugees were coming in. They had to open up another office in Appleton and settle more, especially Congolese. I think a lot of them now are being settled in Appleton, but eventually they still find their way back into Oshkosh because their relatives and friends are here in Oshkosh. So even if the office decided, like, hey, as a government, we found you an apartment in Appleton, they'll be there for like a few months, and then they'll be back here in town.
Yeah. Do you have anything else?
I guess the only thing I can say about maybe the needs when we first arrive, I guess for myself, when I first came here, I was very afraid, you know, as a little kid. And I think a lot of that is obviously a new environment, but half of it was the people who were trying to, you don't understand what they're saying. And this might be the first time you're seeing people that look different from you. So like, I just remember that being a big like shock to me as a little kid. So I think that definitely kind of pushes me towards more advocacy work, because I would like to be someone that is there that a little kid can see and be like, okay, I'm comfortable because I've seen someone that looks like her, and she can, you know, make me feel more comfortable in a place that is new to me. So representation for sure.
Yeah. And then there's another question. How could the local government provide greater support for refugee communities instead of primarily relying on faith-based organizations?
Well, I think there are some things that the government did not do right in the beginning. Yes, in the beginning, the government decided, yeah, we're going to house these refugees in our community. But I think there wasn't much preparation done to the local population in these towns or in these cities where these refugees were going to be settled. So there was a lot of backlash several years before. Because suddenly you have these newcomers that do not know the area, do not know the language, look different, and then they are dumped in Oshkosh, where the larger population of neighbors, white neighbors, suddenly start seeing people who don't look like them. And there was already that stereotype that Americans are used to seeing a black man or a black woman from Chicago violence. So the backlash was a lot in the beginning, where certain refugee men, you're just taking a walk, you are roughed up by the police. There was a lot of issues when it comes to race. And we started talking about it with the government, advocating like, look, you did not do your job. You did not hold town halls, preparing your people like these people coming are just like us. So from moving forward from then, yes, now the government has been working with us, the community, and finding ways to reduce some of those.
Do you have anything?
That's pretty good.
Okay. And then another question is, what are the most helpful ways that those in Oshkosh that are not holding government or local leadership positions can help support these agencies or refugee communities?
Well, as advocates, myself, for a start, I've been advocating not only for the refugee community, but for the people of color, all genders. But for now, I think it's about time to have a conversation with our leadership in Oshkosh that some of these younger children from the refugee community, these are the children of earlier refugees like Ayak who are now graduating from college. I think our conversation has to shift now to the government, to the community, that they should start looking in employing some of these people. They need to take leadership in their communities because they live in those communities. They understand that community better than anybody else. So I think that will be the greater move moving forward, is to advocate hiring of these people, because there's no excuse now. Before there was excuse that, okay, the refugee population were not educated. There was that part. Now I would like to see refugees that are educated be in these leadership positions and help their community better. Because I think if Ayak was to go into Appleton and talk to that community, they would look at her like she's our own sister, child that we saw grow up. They would really understand and pay attention more of people like her.
And within like within your position and through your support and advocacy, has there been like any conversations started with local governments?
Yes, conversation has been going on, but you have to understand that there's always resistance. Doing advocacy work does not mean that you can always get what you need. That's why some of us are needed to be there to be able to go into those offices and talk. But we also need some of younger people to be on the street and not to loot, not to cause trouble, but to protest or to advocate. Okay, so yes, going into these offices, advocating for certain things has not been easy, because those that are running those offices, they are comfortable with the way things are. They are comfortable in having certain individuals be in charge of these communities. They trust certain individuals, like, okay, if that individual that we've known for the last 20 years is working in that community, we are happy to have that person in there. But for now, we are saying, yeah, they are happy, but is the community happy? Have they taken time to ask the community? Because if you gave me a leader that I am not happy with, you cannot turn around and say, hey, you guys, we gave you a leader, just keep quiet, everything is okay. You know, I feel like there has to be more dialogue within us in the community and those in leadership in the government. And that's where we come in, because it's easy for me to go in some of these offices and talk to these leaders. But it's not easy for that parent that I was talking about who has a level of education and also cultural barriers, because like I said, some of these cultural barriers are so deep that in some of these countries where these people came from, they cannot even walk into a government office. There's so fear of the government office, you know, and that is just so complicated. That's why we come in. We are able to go into that office and talk and advocate. Sometime, yeah, we'll get a little bit, but it's better than having nothing.
Yeah, hopefully we can work towards implementing change within our community.
Right.
And then, is there anything that both of you would like to share further? There's a question. So as Ayak mentioned before, African refugees and migrants have to navigate anti-Blackness, racism, and xenophobia. If you feel comfortable sharing, how have you experienced these forms of oppression in Oshkosh?
Ayak, have you?
You know, I guess I've grown up in Oshkosh majority of my life, I guess I can say. So, growing up, I didn't notice these like systems that were working against me. But since now I've like gone through college and I like can understand like, I guess I can understand like my position more. I can see where those systems have worked against me and work against people who look like me. So yeah, I can definitely say that I've gone through stuff like that and I still see it within my community and towards my community. So like, yeah, I mean, it's very common and prevalent and it's very much so here. So yeah, I think representation definitely is probably the best route we can take in trying to alleviate some of this stuff, is having leaders within our community who are a part of our community, like actually be the voice. I think that will help a lot in alleviating a lot of these oppressions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that question comes at the time where a lot has been going on in the country in terms of race relations. Personally, myself, I go through a lot of racial injustice towards me as a person in my day-to-day life. I've had so much trouble by the police. Maybe we don't even have time to go into so many details about it, but I can say in certain instances, you would feel like, oh my God, I just survived that. When I mean survive that, I mean a potential, it could be a potential shootout, you know, that can easily happen, because I've seen it happen to so many people and it has happened to me. You know, that is the government, the police handling me. Now, I have seen how the police as well in Oshkosh treat my people. When I mean my people, especially the refugee men and women in this town. There's disrespect toward these women. They talk to them like they're kids. They pull them over anyhow. I've seen families talked to me that basically they are pulled over in downtown, and then they're not given a ticket. They'll let them go home, and then finally the police will come home and knock on the door to issue a ticket in front of the kids. Now, that policing tells me it's wrong. It further intimidates the community, and it further enhances that stereotype. Now, the stereotype is not only for the Black African or the refugee, but it's for people of color. So things have not been easy for everybody. I go through it. I have seen how even our teenage boys, especially the boy refugee, get treated at McDonald's. I've had conversations with the police chief about that. I have seen 6 boys getting kicked out of McDonald's. For what? Because they were eating excess ketchup. And the manager at McDonald's will call the police, and the police will come there and basically rough up these kids and bring them to the street in the middle of the town, being yelled at by the police while people are driving, passing through. And as I explained to the police, is like that image you are creating right there, you are basically cementing that stereotype, like, well, you see what these Black kids are doing, they're doing so bad, you know, and yet you don't see that happen to the white kids. The white kids teenagers are teenagers. The white kids can eat as much ketchup as they want. There's no police that's going to be called on them. They're not going to be paraded on the street. So you see that injustice happen all the time as you drive around. And some of us, it just comes natural. Like you see something wrong, you just feel like, wait a minute, let me go ask what's going on. Why didn't you call the parents to these kids if they were misbehaving? But by putting them in the middle of the street, it's basically you are pushing this agenda in town that these Black kids are problematic. And we see, for me personally, I see that as wrong.
Yeah, thank you for both of you sharing these experiences, and it really shows that there's still work that needs to be done. And then I wanted to share this comment from our mayor. It says, "Thank you for having this conversation. I've been listening as I drive. I have learned much and also have much to learn. I must get back to work, but I look forward to continuing the conversation." Well, I want to thank you both for being here and sharing your experiences and giving insight about how this community has been impacted, not only through COVID, but in general through other experiences. So, yeah. Is there anything else you both would like to say?
Thank you so much for inviting us, or inviting me to this forum to talk about issues that affect our community here in Oshkosh. The struggle always continue. It's not that we can say, well, today we scored 1 point, then everything is fine. No. The same fight that we are fighting right now, putting it in historical terms or in historical context, these are the fights great men and women fought in the 60s, in the 40s, in the 70s. And here we are in 2021, we are still protesting about equality for the LGBT community, for the brown and Black people. You know, the struggle continues, but we must be very, very careful that even when we struggle right now, when we are fighting, we still have others who will always stand on the way to stop us. So, but we have to continue. And also, I'm glad for the fact that I'm able to have this conversation with Ayak, a young, I should say, a young woman now, or young lady, or a lady now, somebody that I've known when she was a little girl. And like I wanted to say, like, I'm so proud of her as part of the community, you know, to see her succeed in higher education and to be who she is and to be an advocate. I strongly believe she will do very well in leading her people in this community if she's given that opportunity. And I think it is time for those in government, those in leadership position, to look at some of these human resource that we have like her, that when they graduate, they get to be employed in our city and help our city. It would be sad for me to hear that Ayak has gotten a job in New York or Alaska when she can get a job here in Oshkosh. So thank you.
Yeah, yes, she will go on to do great things. Well, thank you so much. Hope you all have a great day.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us.